that. I started my career in very large organizations like United Airlines and Amazon and slowly made my way to startups intentionally. Looking forward to spending time with you guys today, and please feel free to ask all the hard questions.
Thanks, G. Hey everyone, I'm Allie. My pronouns are she, her. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York. I moved here 5 days after college about 13 years ago because I knew I wanted to be in the scene. What scene? Didn't know, but it was likely the music scene. And here I am. I have a background in mission-driven companies like SoundCloud, but come from So Far Sounds, which is more of a live events music space, change.org, which is super mission-driven in itself. And I've done everything across the HR life cycle, started my career in recruitment, pitched my first job as a first people ops hire. The founder hired me and had to learn everything on the spot. So if you're going through that yourself, I feel you, I'm with you. Google and now AI is your friend. We'll talk a little bit about all of this. And as the VP of People and Culture at SoundCloud, I really oversee not just people partnerships with leaders across the business, but now more recently the DEI function and the talent team. So let's talk about these growing pains, okay? Because it's still growing. All right, over to Kate.
Thank you kindly, Ali. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Noel. You can just call me Kate. I am the SVP and head of people operations at Morning Brew Inc. If you are not familiar, Morning Brew is a business digital media company that I joined about 7 years ago, which is wild because my onboarding included COVID. So there you go. Figuring out how to make this company that was based in New York go fully remote within my 30, 60, 90. So that was fab. But now I am located out in Atlanta, which has been great. Being at Morning Brew, I've had the opportunity to do my first startup experience. So, G and Ali, I think we have a lot of similarities there where we've kind of gotten our hands dirty in the HR space. It's a little bit different than working in legacy spaces. So, shout out to everyone who has experience or are curious about it. I think it will be a very great space for it. And I've also worked, like I mentioned, legacy spaces as well, whether it's Madison Square Garden or in higher education with Rutgers University. So I think I've had the pleasure of using the benefit of people operations where you can work in any industry. For the most part, I've had some type of exposure to it or I've been adjacent. So that's been really cool. And aside from that, I also have my own HR show, which is called People Person, which is really exciting that I'm able to do with Morning Brew as well. It's an HR show for HR people, which I think is rare because oftentimes we're creating the space for others, but how often do we get the space to have for ourselves as people? So it's great. I love it. They're not paying me to say that. I just genuinely enjoy it. So wherever you listen to your podcast or watch any shows, I'd be more than glad to have you be a part of our supporters. So yeah, I'm excited to have the conversation. And again, Letitia and Perfecta, thank you for having us all here.
Thank you so much. I just dropped the link to the conversation that I was able to have with Kate on People Person, but I have binged every single one of the episodes also on YouTube, and it's extremely valuable as HR is just changing by the day. All right, so moving on to a little bit about Perfecta. If you aren't familiar with Perfecta, you're like, sounds interesting, but what do they do? As I mentioned, we are a boutique consultancy. Essentially, our goal is to build HR and culture, but also aligning that with company strategy. What we have seen, I think we're going to talk about this sometimes, is that HR is there to react to what leadership decides. And our one of our biggest goals at Perfecta is to make sure that HR has a seat at the table. What does it mean for HR to help to drive strategic decisions, to create the strategies and the goals? Because your people are your most important asset, right? With that being said, we also treat employees as clients. So essentially, what does that mean? We're here to help companies rebuild trust in the relationship between employees and HR. Um, and sometimes HR gets a bad rep. Let's just, be honest, right? And so our goal is to reframe how HR is positioned. And then also, we're really passionate about regenerative cultures. So, regenerative cultures are when your employees are motivated and excited to come to work and empowered every single day. It's a little bit different than, what are the solutions that we need to, or benefits that we need to provide just to keep them here, but it's how do we actually not even just retain our talent, but empower and motivate them to grow, to work at their highest potential, to rave about your company to, their friends, right? And again, going back to that employer of choice. So that's about it about Perfeqta. If you all have any questions about what we do and who we work with, you are more than welcome to email us. You can find me on LinkedIn, chat me here in Zoom. But moving on to today's conversation, really three goals. How to know what to prioritize when everything feels urgent. So you can step out of the administrative leads and focus on the future. HR is constantly putting out fires. There's always things to do. But how do you get to prioritize? How do you prioritize keeping your role and your function, again, having that seat at the table and also balancing all the things that are thrown on your plate on a day-to-day? Next, how to get HR seat at leadership table, connecting people strategy directly to revenue and growth. Because let's be honest, your leaders, they care about money and dollars, right? And again, employees are your biggest asset, but how do we make sure that it is being connected to the growth, the future of the company? And then lastly, bridging the gap between executive vision and employee execution so growth doesn't outpace your team's ability to deliver. Something that we often see with the companies we work with at here at Perfeqta is that our clients, they have these big, audacious goals, but they may not have the foundation or the infrastructure to even get there, right? Or sometimes you see that a company's goals can kind of outgrow and outpace where their employees are. So how do you develop, coach, train, really nurture your talent to get them up to par and get them up to where your leadership wants to take the company? So those two things always need to be in alignment. And that's just a few of the things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about a little bit of all the things when it comes to HR. These are some challenges, and you all may have some other challenges that you've seen, so I'm going to breeze through this. Replacing a salary employee can cost a company up to 4 times its annual salary. I know we know that in the work that we do here in this space. And so when your leaders or when anyone is not really fully focusing on retaining good talent, especially top talent, show them these numbers, y'all, because it's not just replacing someone, it's all of the time and energy that goes into creating a new rec, to creating a hiring plan, to having your leaders be a part of those conversations, to interview talent, and even your time that goes into it, right? So retention is one of the most expensive HR challenges. Next is almost half of HR leaders spend more than half their time on admin, which leaves little room to work on that strategy piece that moves the business, which we talked about. But again, it's important for us to focus on strategy. So how do we do it all when we really don't have the time to do it all? We're going to talk about that. Disconnected HR systems create silos, block access to critical information, and force teams into endless manual data entry. It's really interesting when we speak with so many amazing organizations that are using a lot. When you think about their HR tech stack and their systems, they're using tools over here and tools over there, and sometimes things are being done manually. And so what does it look like for that to be more of a centralized hub? And how do we utilize AI to make sure that we're being as effective? So we can go back to that last point, which is getting the admin stuff automated so we can do the strategy work. And then the last challenge here is as teams grow and distribute across states and countries, staying compliant with changing employment laws becomes one of the most overlooked risks in the business. And it can be also one of the most costly as well if those things are not in step. So those are some of the challenges. If y'all have seen any other challenges, let us know. And I have a question for you all. If you could delegate one thing, just one thing, okay, if you got to drop two, I'll let you have 2 or 3. If you could delegate anything on your plate right now, what would it be? Let us know in the chat. If you could delegate one thing, what would it be? I'll give y'all a second to drop that in the chat. Latricia, end of fiscal year task. Yes. Anyone else? If I know y'all got some things to delegate, I'm gonna start calling on people. All right, Tamika, scheduling meetings. Yeah, oof, that is the bane of my existence for sure. Shay, creating social post content. Look, we do it all in our roles, right? All right. Finding new evaluation tools. Yes, yes, yes. You know what's interesting? Okay, Leandra updating distribution lists for all of my ERGs and affinity groups. So out of the one, two, three, four, five, actually six responses, you all have said completely different things. I think that really speaks to all of the responsibilities that you all have and that you're carrying in your role. So thank you for sharing. Okay, and let's chat. So moving on to the panel. My first question now is for Genesis. What are the most common signs that a company's HR systems cannot keep up with this growth? And what's usually the first thing that breaks?
Mm. This is such a good question because when I think about systems, I don't just think about like the systems of like an HR system where we put our data, right? I also think about the systems and processes that all sort of go with each other. So when you think about a system, and you're a really small company, right? You don't necessarily always invest a ton of money up front into all the bells and whistles. You sort of think about the very traditional need to haves, which is making sure people get paid. So your payroll system, right? As you continue to grow and you think about becoming a more strategic HR function, you start to think about all the things that you wish you had in a system that you tend to do manually, especially at a smaller company. So if you start to think about being strategic and having a seat at that table, and being able to be a proactive HR person versus sort of reactive, as you talked about, Letitia, you think about the data points that you wish you had that maybe your systems aren't able to hold or to manage. Something as simple as like, hey, I'm expanding, right? And now I need to support an employee population that's global, maybe even international. And there's a lot of systems that might be okay to manage sort of a very small employee population, but when you start to expand and grow and want to support a global workforce, those things start to become very difficult from a payroll perspective, from an onboarding perspective, even from a recruiting perspective. Those tools and resources become really important. When you think about even from a systems perspective, then thinking back to all those employees' life cycle things that you talked about, if you want to enhance those things, right? And you think about our recruiting and hiring and onboarding experience, systems can do a lot in terms of helping you be a more strategic and thoughtful HR person in terms of how you're recruiting and what that hiring experience looks like. Compensation, that's something that I think in my role, I can't tell you, compensation comes up every single day, and how employees want to understand how they're paid. And a lot of those conversations being at a smaller company sometimes have to happen manually. And you think about an exercise that you do is like job matching and job descriptions. It's such a manual thing that you have to do. And if you don't have a compensation function or a system that helps support that work, it's very time consuming, but it's very high value. So those are a couple of things, right, that I think are like low hanging fruit that are so important that you don't necessarily think about when you have 20, 30 people at a company, you do that manually. But when you think about expanding retention of people who start to think about, am I getting paid enough? Do I want a raise? How much of a raise should I ask for? I'm taking on additional responsibilities. Am I still doing the same job? Those are all things that between systems and processes, when you start to scale, really start to be very impactful and they're very important.
How often, this is a follow-up question to that because that was great. How
Yeah.
often do you think that companies should look at where they are, companies' growth? Like, would you say that's quarterly, 6 months,
Yeah.
a year? Like, how do you get to the point where it's like, okay, was working is not working anymore.
Yeah, I think it depends. I'm someone that of the mindset that I think when I started my HR career early on, I started in sales actually. So my mind already sort of worked from a very unique perspective where I'm constantly in the mind state of continuous improvement. So I think constantly, right? Like if you think about sort of setting your strategy for the next year, what are the things that you want to think about doing proactively that are going to help you be a better HR business partner, right? For the rest of the year. Some of that is going to be impacted by the direction of the business, right? When your executives are all sitting in a room and they're having a conversation about what the work that needs to get done, you put your HR hat and you think about, okay, well, how do I enable that from a people perspective? And some of that is, okay, well, our retention isn't great. We have a lot of turnover, right? That's an obvious one that sort of always comes up. What are the things that I have from a HR toolkit perspective that I need to start thinking about now and addressing so that when I come to these meetings, I have the data to provide to provide to be able to convince or have the business case to justify what I'm asking for. So that's why I think it's a constant thing where you constantly have to bring this up. But in order to have really good data, you have to have the right systems. It isn't abnormal, I think, at smaller companies to start from a place of like zero data. So you do have to sometimes wait for a couple years of data to be integrated into a system in order for that to actually tell the story. And so sometimes it does take a little bit of time, but I think when you're thinking about systems and evaluating what you need, to me, if you want to be sort of a strategic HR person, you need to be thinking about those things constantly. You need to be having conversations with your vendors and your customer success partners and jump on calls with them, even if, it's not to buy anything new from them, it's to talk about sort of what tools, resources, capabilities are getting released. If you have a conversation with the business leader and they're saying, I wish this dashboard showed me X from an employee engagement perspective, right? Have those conversations consistently with your vendors and your partners to see if there's a release that's coming up or to propose an idea that maybe their tech teams can go back and implement into a system and maybe they can think about sort of rolling that out into their next sort of initiatives. But anyway, long-winded answer to say all the time. But it
Yeah,
just depends on what's going on from the business side.
absolutely. And I appreciate you. It's like you said, it's that continuous improvement and always making sure that when those conversations are happening, that you're thinking about the enablement of people performance. So thank you for that.
Of course.
All right, my next question is for Allie. So I've already talked about it, that balance between all of the urgent tasks and the day-to-day fires, but also having to, have time for strategy. Allie, how do you prioritize that? How do you make room for both?
Yes. Okay. So nothing worse than getting the all caps urgent email, colon, whatever. And then you open it, it's like, what is the winter holiday? And it's June. And I'm like, girl, this is not the urgency. But that's not to say there aren't urgent things that we deal with in HR. There are like payroll deadlines. There's that ERG event that has last minute logistic issues, employee relations, um, really sensitive benefits questions that are time sensitive. Like there's things that we're dealing with every day. So let's think about this in 4 parts. Get ready to take some notes. Number one, leave about 10% of your capacity for true urgency. Since people work is unpredictable, we actually need to build in the time for surprises. So leave that space available. Second is going to be rooted in goal setting. If you have the right goals, whether you do them quarterly or annual, however you do them, is it OKRs? I don't know, but whatever cadence works for you, have the language. So when a leader comes to you and they say, hey, I have this thing, it's urgent, I need it prioritized. It's not that we're going to push back and say your thing doesn't matter. It's saying, actually, here's what HR is focused on for this period of time. And if this needs to jump the line, tell me what else I can drop. Because we can't make room for everything. So it's not a no, it's a trade. Learn how to trade with your leadership and your executives. And that leads me to the third thing, it's timing is negotiable. So you can always say, hey, thanks for flagging this. I hear you, it's urgent. I've got a few other things this week. Can I actually get to this next week? 9 times out of 10, they'll be like, oh yeah, that's fine. When it's like, hey, Allie, do you have a second? No. Can we do this next week? Oh yeah, that's fine. Help them reframe that urgency is urgency and also needing me and needing me for something that can be pushed can be pushed. And then, if all else fails, number four, do not forget the power of no. There's actually things that we should say no to, that we should stop because we are the experts in our HR space and we know what we need to prioritize and what needs to get done. No, sorry, payrolls this week. No, I can't do that. Like the biggest priorities are getting people hired for this team, and I don't have space for other things right now. So, to wrap that all up, 10% for the real fires. Let your goals do the talking, negotiate your timing, and then don't be afraid to say no. It's one of my favorite things I've learned, and I learned it too late, but know how to say no.
Thank you, Allie. That was so good. I mean, setting boundaries, right? And I think that that is a lesson not just for HR leaders, but anyone that's in a position that holds a lot of weight, even in our personal lives, because like you said, we know what's urgent, we know what needs to get done. And I love what you also mentioned about if someone asks you for something, it's reminding them, hey, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. These are all the things that I'm doing right now. If I do this thing, these other things are going to have to get pushed. Is that okay? So I appreciate you for sharing that. Before I move on to the next question, Kate or Genesis, do y'all have anything to add to that? Balancing the fires and urgency with strategy?
Yeah, actually, one thing I was going to say to Ali is there's no such thing as too late. It's just in the time in which you learned it. Because HR is an ongoing experience. And so,
Yeah.
whatever experience you've had and feeling like, dang, I probably should have said no to that, for today and tomorrow. And the best part about it is like the community that we're creating here, where we're teaching others how to say no, and that no is a full sentence. And I think that there's also ways in which we can set boundaries not even just verbally, but perhaps even through tech. G mentioned it. Tech is the now. It's today. It's what we're doing. So whether it's like in your Slack away message, whether it's in like you're blocking something that's very visible on your calendar that says "Don't touch this," busy. So if you find yourself, depending for whatever reason you may have, whether it's your level of seniority or you're different, dealing with different temperaments at work, and perhaps you don't feel necessarily empowered to vocalize and just say actually no. And so that's a muscle. It takes time to build that at times. And so just remember, you don't necessarily always have to vocalize the no or vocalize the reframing. You can have it in your away message. You can say, hey, a bit slow to respond to blah, 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 blah. If it is urgent, I literally have done this before when I had to step away for a little bit. I created 3 questions. If you answer 2 out of 3 yes, that means it is not as urgent as you think. You can find me next week for office hours. People cackled at it, but they asked themselves that question and they realized, oh, it's urgent to me, but is it urgent to the business? And so that's something I'd probably toss into the pile there of like, let the tech work for you. And that might take you a little bit further too, on top of what Atlee shared as well, because that is going to have to be a place where you have to feel comfortable to advocate for yourself, because advocating for yourself is advocating for the outcome of the business.
Yeah, I'll add one more thing. I also want to acknowledge that it's probably easier to say no when you're in a more senior position.
Yeah.
Uh, and again, I think we have a variety of people on the call that maybe aren't in that senior positions. And I think I want to think about early on when I started in my career, and even now, how important it is building trust and building those relationships. And I think it's very easy for us to want to say yes to everything, right? When we're in a place where we're just getting started, we don't have the trust. We want those relationships so that we can eventually get proactively invited to the secret conversations. That's hard, right? So you want to be able to say yes to everything because you think yes equals trust equals they'll like me, right? Which will make my relationship easier and it'll just make things a lot more effective, right? I think you're going to have to sort of think through establishing in your conversations very early on when you're meeting with your leaders or your managers as an HR person. Having those conversations, I think, live helps a little bit easier later on to have those conversations via Slack or via Teams to say no, because now you've sort of developed a rapport and you're not just a name on a Slack message that's saying no. You're someone that's established a little bit of trust early on so that they understand you're a person too and not just an HR person behind the screen.
One last thing, and I'll be quiet because you just triggered something in my mind, G.
Yeah.
Also say, if you feel something, say something. If you happen to be in an org where there are layers of management that is still within your HR wheelhouse, feel comfortable to let your manager quote unquote do the hard work for you as well if you are in an earlier stage in your career. Because exactly like G said, and even as Ali, alluded to, is like we don't always assume that you can say the things if you're not in the space to say the things. And some things come with time, whether it's in your experience, it's building those relationships, being in a more senior seat. So if you are not feeling extremely confident to do so, or perhaps you need someone to help you see the forest through the trees, rely on a manager who hopefully is someone that, you report directly into. They can probably use some of their own equity capital to throw into that situation to make it a bit of ease for you as well. And while I know that's not often the case, because how often is HR the smallest department supporting the largest part of the business, which is literally everyone and their mom? But if you happen to have that though, use that to your advantage because it's definitely a great secret weapon.
And while on that note, Kay, I do have a question for you.
So be quiet. See, I took myself off mute. Go ahead.
See, don't even do that. Okay. A lot of HR leaders struggle to get leadership to see people strategy as a core business priority. How do you make that business case? And what does it look like when HR has a real seat at the leadership table?
Okay, I actually love this question because I feel like at times we overcomplicate it. I don't think it's that difficult to make leaders recognize how HR is a part of business strategy. I think that as HR, we inherently know that, but when we explain it to leaders or to stakeholders, we're using HR jargon, and so that's how we lose them. We're like, engagement surveys are so important. They could probably care less about engagement surveys. What you need to focus on as a people person or a people leader is business outcome. Oftentimes, when you're talking to stakeholders, they're concerned about what is risk, what is the P&L in this, what are the financial advantages that we have in that? So going back to the engagement survey example, if we're talking about, our scores are low, when I'm broaching this topic to executives, I am not saying, hey, our engagement scores are low. I am saying, hey, because of a concern of psychological safety, we have a higher level of attrition that is happening, which takes away from people working on the product that is bringing in money. Like those are the ways in which you need to bring the logic to the things in which they care about. And the more you do that, the more they're recognizing that not only are you caring about the HR space, which is cool, but then you're showing your business acumen of taking whatever is happening in real time and translating it into language that the other business leaders are actually concerned about. And what that also shows is that you're doing the work for them. Oftentimes, whether it's a C-suite or just real executive folks, they are relying on you to do the work they don't have the capacity to give their mind to. So if you're just giving them the problem, which is already very HR heavy, and you're not translating it to them on what we can do next as an action plan, you have already lost your trust with them. They're just like, oh, you are admin because you're giving me the problem. You're not creating strategy, and you're certainly not being task oriented at the very least to create a solution. So I found that to be a strength that I really worked on when working in startup because there is no more of a psychotic place than working in a startup business. And I've actually had a very interesting pleasure of working for founders who are also very young. So this was their very first job. So imagine your first job is one that you're creating. What a time. So that was really interesting for me to find out that like, oh, okay, like I need to be the one to come with solution. I need to pay attention to these business meetings, or even just like executive reviews, for example. That's an example of like if you're doing performance reviews and et cetera, we're not just talking about, oh, are you meeting expectations or not? It's you as then the people person looking at trends, looking at like the things that are happening quarter after quarter. That could be your own audit of then bringing that up proactively to your stakeholders to say, hey, we are noticing there is X, Y, and Z happening here. This is something I think we should consider and recommend for the next quarter or so. What are your thoughts? That is you providing that on a platter. It makes that much easier. And to the latter part of your question, Letitia, of what does it look like then when HR really does have a seat at the table? To me, I believe it shows up when they start discussing things with you before making the decision. I think we have all experienced when HR has become the Olivia Pope of the organization. It's like we're in crisis management. we're like, hey, so we tweeted something that we probably shouldn't have tweeted. Can you help us? It's like, no, you should have told. We sent me the draft of the tweet before you put it on the internet. At this point, who's tweeting these days? So that's probably problematic in itself. But the point of the matter is, when a leader is asking your opinion before making an executive decision or before implementing something, or they care about your opinion before rolling something out, that's when you know you have bought their trust. That's when you know you have actually not just brought a seat, but you've added to that table the value of your perspective, the value of your bias, the value of your training, and just knowing that you're constantly feeding yourself information of what company culture is, knowing the nuances of what your CEO or manager cares about, and marrying those two things together. It saves a whole lot of time. Sometimes it takes time to build those relationships, but when you got it, you got it.
That was so good. And I was taking notes as well as you were talking. And I put in the chat like how many times, like the amount of times I've heard HR leaders say, I should have known about this because I could have stopped it from becoming a problem. And now I have to fix it. Um, Kate, a follow-up question to you is around the trend. So you said, I love what you mentioned about not just bringing a problem, but bringing a solution or bringing a trend, a pattern, data. Do you have examples of the type of trends that maybe you have brought to the table or that you would recommend that we look at?
So it's interesting. So this is going to be our first season of doing executive reviews for our organization. We've always done performance reviews. We've also done engagement surveys. But what I have noticed, speaking of a trend, is that in formal capacities, I'm finding, oh, this person's fantastic, this person's good, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. But then when it comes to informal feedback, which, shout out to me. But when I'm getting informal feedback, that's when I'm getting quote unquote real tea, or that's when I'm getting like the real nitty gritty of like what it is to exist within specific team cultures. Because companies have a culture, but even departments have their own culture within the
Right.
organization. And so an example of looking at trends is noticing that like I'm seeing one thing in a formal space, but I'm hearing something in different spaces. And so in creating an executive 360, for example, that was me, one, introducing a platform to allow for employees, if they're doing upward feedback or peer reviews, to feel comfortable knowing that this information is going to be anonymous and that it's going through a third party vendor so that they can feel psychological safety to know like, hey, this is being shared. And also with findings of these reports, it's not just going to exist in the platform. It's me as an HR person speaking directly to each of these execs to let them know directly, like, hey, this is not just coming from who you believe is reporting into you, but this is happening across, the org, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think it also then, when we're able to share at large, like, hey, we did an executive 360, it shows accountability. I think oftentimes in organizations, it is quick to, point to lower management or early stage employees who are less in seniority, but folks can feel that as you go higher up in the career ladder, that accountability is not given at the same level to executives, whether it's in goals or bonuses or whatever. But us being able to do this with Executive 360, people were pleasantly surprised that this was something that we were taking that on as an initiative to implement. And so that's an example where it's like I could have just went to my CEO and said, "Oh my gosh, did you hear what they said about?" Uh, I'm trying to think of a name that's not specific. That person. Did you hear what they said about that person? And then we just left it at that. Or if I just kept bringing up to my CEO, oh my gosh, people keep complaining on Glassdoor that, our executives are blah, 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 and nothing about it. That is, I am not adding value to that conversation. Adding value is, hi, CEO, I have noticed within trends of looking at Glassdoor, Indeed reviews, surveys, as well as just commonplace conversations that we need to really start paying a bit more attention to our executives, which we'll consider it to be VP and up. I think a solution to this, at least to show a good first step, is considering executive 360s. Let me show you what that rollout would look like, a timeline, and let me know your thoughts on that. That completely changes the game. And also, execs are expensive. So another thing I can point to is this is how much it costs to have bad press about your execs. How much do you care? Recession indicator. So that perks up everyone's ears very quickly, typically. Um, exactly. And so yeah, that's basically an example in real time that we've done pretty recently, actually, at Morning Brew.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean, that's music to my ears too, just as a CEO within my business. Like, I would love if, I was brought solutions with problems and a recommendation and a timeline. Like, the easier you can help your executive make a decision by being informed, um, I think the easier you would be able to get a yes. Um, with that being said, I have a question for you all. On a scale of 1 to 10, do you feel like HR is a key part of your business growth strategy? Drop your number in the chat. 1 being HR is purely admin, or 10 being HR is part of every growth decision. And Kay, I think you gave great examples of what it looks like to be at that 10, honestly. And Kay, you were also employee number 7, and
Yeah.
now your company is at hundreds of
Yeah,
employees.
we're probably at, I think I just hired 2 more people. So 400 and change.
Wow.
Been really exciting to see our growth. It's been cool.
Wow. And so you came on as employee number 7 as head of HR. So,
Yes, I was the first mom. I was the first HR person. No, it's insane. The funny story is when I came in, my daughter was 6 months, and I was telling the guys like, "Hey, I need a place to like pump." They said, "Pump what?" I said, "Oh, we are in need of training." But that just goes to show like just how much work came from the ground up, and it's been really cool to see from how we went from pump what to having a full-fledged office in New York and having regulations and compliance. So it's been
that's funny, but it's also cool to see that they recognize the value of HR and hired someone very early on before they even got to 10.
Doesn't happen often, I have to say. That was
Mm.
actually very odd. That's why I thought it was a Ponzi scheme at first. And so I did the interview out of curiosity because I'm very nosy, which is why I'm in HR. But once I realized that they understood the value very early, I think it helped us not go through a lot of commonplace growing pains that other orgs may have had because oftentimes they're not bringing HR early enough because they may seem HR as a luxury as opposed to a necessity. And so I think that
Yeah.
helped a lot with our growth as well.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Okay, Genesis, question for you. Roles shift fast in a scaling company, and people often end up doing two, maybe 3 jobs in one role. So, how do you handle that conversation with employees so that expectations of them are clear during a state of change or a state of growth, and not even just growth, but restructuring, right? New expectations. Our roles constantly change, and I'm sure for many of us, or even our the people that we work with, their job description might not match what they do on a day to day. So, and HR is really oftentimes responsible for helping to set those expectations. So, Genesis, how have you done that?
Yeah, this happens all the time, unfortunately, especially at a startup where the I think the edict is always like keep trying stuff, fail fast, just do it. What I would say is it starts probably way before you even have a conversation with an employee around the job description. We talked a bit about earlier about I wish I would have known about this earlier, so this wouldn't be a problem today. Because if we were involved in that conversation early on when we were thinking about restructuring a team or a role or a department, we probably would have made sure that the right things were in place to begin with. So that starts with having the right people in the room, for example. So what I've seen oftentimes is sort of you have maybe senior leadership who have an idea about scalability or efficiencies, right? We hear those words and sometimes they hide a lot of underlying things, but efficiencies, right? Oh, well, we can just have X person take this job, or we can just have X person take this portion of the job. And the idea to them is it's not that much work, or they're not doing that much extra work. We can just have them do it. But if the HR person would have been in the room, right, and you're someone who's been having those strategic conversations and you're embedded in the business, you would be someone in those conversations that can say, actually, what you don't know is this role actually does X, Y, and Z, which is a significant portion of one person's job. They're critical talent, right? Because they've been with the company for 10 years. And if we lose them, we lose that knowledge. Or actually, that portion of their job is really, really important. And there creates some risks if you actually allow that person to leave, or if you shift the work prematurely, right? Here's all the risks that that creates from a client perspective, internally or externally, right? So I'd say one, it starts before we even have a job description conversation. So making sure that when you're talking about reorgs, organizational design and development, you are equipped to have those conversations and being a part of those conversations ahead of time with leadership. The second thing I would say then is making sure that you have, outside of making sure you have the right people in the room, it's making sure that you are also then following this change management sort of process, right? So you're about to make these changes. What are you doing in preparation to roll out these changes? And one of those things would be a job description, right? But I'm a firm believer I can help you create the job description, but the manager really should be owning that. So what role does the HR person then play in enabling and empowering that manager to not only create a tactical job description, but being responsible for then having that conversation with that employee to set the expectation? So oftentimes what happens is we shift around responsibilities. We sort of chalk it up to just a couple of things extra that someone has on their plate that might be a simple deliverable in someone else's mind, but the conversations didn't happen. And now that employee is juggling the job they used to do yesterday, plus the additional tasks that you gave them to do today, and no conversation happened around prioritization. What's going to stop? What should, take less time of your time? Enabling and empowering your employee now to go back and tell their customers, either internally or externally, that now they have to have a prioritization conversation as well to reset expectations. So there's a lot of things, again, outside of tactically getting the job description together and communicating those things, because the job description isn't going to list all 72 things that you do every week, right? It's meant to just be able to say, this is where I want you to focus your time. This is what you're responsible for, how you operate from a behavioral perspective. But a lot of it is going to be more valuable if you're having a conversation with your managers and appropriately having expectation setting conversation with them so that they can go back and have those conversations with their teams as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Something you just brought up that has not been a part of this conversation yet is relying on supporting, making sure, not even just supporting, equipping your people managers. Because we can't do it all, right? And your people managers, they can make or break your team's employee experience. They're the ones that are kind of seeing what is happening within their team. And as Kate mentioned earlier in the conversation, yes, a company has a culture, but then there are subcultures within functions and teams. And so equipping your people managers is going to be extremely, one, just necessary and important. So we have 8 minutes left. If you all have questions, start dropping those questions in the chat. And make sure you all stay until the end, because at Perfeqta, we just rolled out our people ops maturity framework and models. A lot of our conversations today have actually been about scaling your HR function. And that is going to help you all to see where your organization might be, but also where you're trying to take it. All right, we do have a question here in the chat, and I'm going to throw this to you, Allie. Apart from years, and this is a great question, by the way. Apart from years of experience, what would you say are key responsibility differences from a junior to mid-level HR professional? If I could take it a step further, junior, mid, senior.
Oh, okay. Junior to mid-level is like from doer to like a little bit of strategy. So doer to strategizer. Like, so you're doing a lot of the work, you're like doing a lot of the admin, and then you become a bit more experienced in your role when you're coming to the table with solutions. So versus like being reactive, getting to more proactive state, utilizing that data that we've been talking about, really visualizing what the year looks like versus what your day looks like. Like that's what I think also
Yeah.
when it goes from mid to, I remember Letitia, when I was working with you on the DEI strategy, I was like stuck in the, okay, what do I do right now? And then we put together a long-term 3-year DEI strategy.
Yeah.
And that took a lot of work. And I think that was like such a pivotal moment in my career to really sit down and say, like, how do we see this long term and connect it to the business goals? And I think that that's probably the change you'll see or your team member, whoever you're speaking to, will make in that transition.
Yeah. So junior, doer, mid, strategizer.
Strategizer,
And then
edge
I would say for a senior, maybe like decision maker.
decision maker, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions, you all? Drop them in the chat, please. Okay, I just want to actually, I'm gonna do our fire round. And you all can share a couple more if you want. But what's the one tool, person, or system you wish you had when you were going through your first major growth stage? So I don't know who wants to take it first, but
I can keep it going and then I'll pass it. We haven't, I think God, all these panels are about AI sometimes. We had a little breath of fresh air, but I am going to bring
yeah.
up AI now. Um, I have this AI agent that kind of is a thought partner, and while I have a team now, gosh, wouldn't have been great when I was a team of one, or it's just a small team to help me think through things that I felt isolated before. And now I'm like, oh, okay, is this the right thing? How does this sound? Would this land? What am I missing? So a thought partner, but an AI agent can also be someone who can create for you and just you give them data and say, create this thing. Gosh, I spent hours and hours creating before, and it does take a lot of time. So back on my plate. So that's what I wish I had before. Yeah, that's helpful.
For me, I would say two things. One is just having a dedicated person in charge of just recruitment because recruitment is such a full-time job, and hopefully this is a safe space. I would hope so. But that's my least favorite thing to do. Like I do not care for like recruitment. Like it's my least favorite thing. But if you're going through a high growth era, that's probably like the biggest thing that you're having your hands involved in. And so I wish I had like, just one person just dedicated to it because also, while I may not like it, it's super important because you need to find the right people. You're not just looking to fill in a role, you're trying to find the perfect fit, how to enrich the process, and to make sure that it's speaking to the DNA of the company. And then lastly, just having a good HR stack. Like I think like if you have the right platforms and stuff like that, that makes a lot of sense. I think that speaks to the AI of it all too. But mostly just having the right person to just take care of recruitment for me.
Yeah, I'll really quickly. I started to talk about this, but manager enablement, manager capability, like as you continue to grow, especially like startup, super small, really big, really quickly. What I often see is we promote people really quickly. I don't even think it's unique to startup, it's anywhere, honestly. We promote really quickly, and sometimes people who are ICs, individual contributors, aren't great managers. And you under anticipate how much attention those managers take from you from an HR perspective, the ER issues that could have been avoided if you had trained and invested in programs for them early on so that they felt more capable and prepared before taking on managing teams. And then you have the retention and turnover aspect that results from a manager not necessarily being a great manager. So if you invest really early on those things, there's a bunch of different levers that could actually be touched that could protect you from a lot of heartache and issues down the road.
Absolutely. Thank y'all so much. So AI, having someone to handle recruitment, and then G, oh my gosh, you just finished.
Manager enablement capability.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. We've
Yeah.
been talking to so many companies about manager enablement trainings because just because someone's good at their job doesn't mean that they are good at leading. So if y'all need people manager training, definitely reach out to me. With that being said, we do have 2 minutes left. So I'm going to go ahead and share with you all that you can check the chat to download a copy of our People Ops Maturity Model. We are just now rolling it out, so y'all are going to be the first ones to see it. It is 4 stages or 4 levels. And again, as I mentioned, we want to help HR culture get from reactive function to a regenerative function. With that being said, if you all are looking to scale or your HR function, if you are trying to figure out how to train, develop your managers, anything that came up today, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I'm going to drop my email here in the chat. You all will get this recording as well. And please, please, please follow, connect with our panelists here. Kate, Genesis, Allie, thank you all so much. Y'all are amazing. This has probably been one of my favorite conversations out of the dozens that we've had. And just to give you all your flowers, thank you for the work that you do, for the care that you put into your cultures that you're building, to your employees. And I'm just rooting for your success. I can't wait to see what you all continue to do, not just for your companies, but for your careers, and how you will continue to help other HR leaders kind of grow along the way by being great examples. And thank you all so much for being here. Make sure you connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And if y'all have any questions, then the maturity framework is actually dropped in the chat as an attachment. So we'll keep the chat open so you all have a second to download it. But with that being said, have a great rest of your day, and I hope that you all enjoy the long weekend.